Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna read you CNN news. This news was released on July 30th, 2020. US economy posts its worst drop on record. New York CNN Business. The US economy contracted at a 32.9 annual rate from April through June, its worst drop on record. The Bureau of Economic Analysis said Thursday. Business ground to a halt during the pandemic lockdown in the spring of this year, and America plunged into its first recession in 11 years, putting an end to the longest economic expansion in US history and wiping out 5 years of economic gains in just a few months. A recession is commonly defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining gross domestic product, the broadest measure of the economy. Between January and March, GDP declined by an annualized rate of 5%. US GDP has worst quarter on record. US GDP collapsed at a minus 32.9% annual rate in Q2 due to the coronavirus pulsing the economy. Oh, wow. But this is no ordinary recession. The combination of public health and economic crisis is unprecedented, and numbers cannot fully convey the hardship millions of Americans are facing. In April, more than 20 million American jobs vanished as business closed and most of the country was under stay-at-home orders. It was the biggest drop in jobs since record-keeping began more than 80 years ago. Claims for unemployment benefits skyrocketed and have still not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. While the labor market has been rebounding since states began to reopen, bringing millions back to work, the country is still down, nearly 15 million jobs since February. Next week's July jobs report is expected to show another 2.3 million jobs added. That would bring the unemployment rate down to 10.3%, still higher than during the worst period of the financial crisis. The US economy is in free fall, but for how long? The coronavirus recession is the deepest on record since the Great Depression, but so far it's short-lived. The Great Recession and Great Depression were particularly painful because they dragged on for years. The worst quarter ever. The pandemic pushed the economy off a cliff. The second quarter GDP drop was nearly 4 times worse than during the peak of the financial crisis, when the economy contracted at an annual rate of 8.4% in the fourth quarter of 2008. Quarterly GDP numbers are expressed as an annualized rate. This means that the economy didn't actually contract by 1/3 from the first quarter of the second to the second. The annualized rate measures how much the economy would grow or shrink if conditions were to persist for 12 months. Not annualized. GDP declined by 9.5% in between April and June, or by $1.8 trillion. But by either measure, it was still the worst quarter on record. The US only began keeping quarterly GDP records in 1947, so it's difficult to compare the current downturn to the Great Depression. That said, in 1932, the US economy contracted 12.9%. Earlier quarterly declines also pale in comparison to this year. Between April and June of 1980, the economy contracted at an annual rate of 8% on the heels of rising oil prices and restrictive monetary policy to control inflation. In the first 3 months of 1958, GDP declined by an annualized 10%, as production slowed and high interest rates put an end to the post-World War II expansion. The downturn followed the Asian flu pandemic of the previous year, which killed 116,000 people in the United States, according to the Center of Disease Control. America's small businesses are struggling. The pandemic shutdown of the past spring hardly left anyone in America untouched. Businesses sent their employees home, shops shuttered, and schools closed. Americans spent less money during the lockdown, in part because so many lost their jobs. Consumer spending, the biggest driver of the U.S. economy, declined at an annual rate of 34.6% during the second quarter, by far the sharpest decline on record. Now that the economy is embarking on the long and arduous road up to recovery, some companies are better prepared than others. While big corporations might have diversified income streams, bigger cushions, and capital markets at their fingertips, America's small business owners are struggling. Brian Karnofsky's environmental consultancy, the Environmental Resource Center, survived 2 recessions before COVID-19 hit, but the pandemic is taking its toll and the company's savings are drying up, he told CNN Business. In the hard-hit hospitality sector, which lives of the face-to-face interaction that coronavirus has rendered risky, things are even harder. Don Zellick, who owns the 1825 Inn bed and breakfast in Pennsylvania, doesn't believe things will go back to normal until spring 2021. A lack of tourists amid quarantine restrictions on travel is weighing on local economies. Like most, we have come to terms with the fact that this will be at least a year-long event, Zellick said. Early on, I thought this may be a 3-month event. Silly me. Meanwhile, workers dependent on in-person contact, including those working in events, are at a loss about how they will make it through the summer. Many small business owners feel forgotten by the government, while larger companies have more options to make it through the crisis. And while many businesses have shifted to online sales and offerings, local, smaller companies have found the uptake didn't help them make enough money to stay afloat. The recovery won't come easily. Washington has deployed trillions of dollars in monetary and fiscal stimulus to help the country through the recession. Loan programs for companies, expanded unemployment benefits, and checks sent directly to many Americans were designed to get the economy back on track as quickly as possible. Economists predict the current third quarter of the year will witness a sharp upswing, with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, for example, forecasting an annualized 13.3% jump between July and September. While that would be good news, it doesn't mean the crisis is over. Earlier this week, the Fed extended its various lending programs through the end of the year to help business and markets functioning. The central bank's Main Street lending facility, that is geared at small and medium-sized companies, become operational only in mid-June, 3 months after the lockdown began. During Wednesday's monetary policy update, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell once again said more needed to be done in terms of monetary and fiscal policy. Lawmakers in Congress also agree that America needs more help, but proposals from Democrats and Republicans are more than $2 trillion apart in spending. This is the end of the news. Thank you for your attention. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.